Low carb diets seem to be the people's choice. It's the first thing that people think of when they want to lose fat. I need to drop my carbs. I need to stop eating this and stop eating that. Stop eating bread. I'm just going to stop eating rice. I'm even going to stop eating fruit. I'm going to stop all the stuff because then I'm going to lose fat. And, there's some people that do it because they want to stop their insulin spiking, because insulin spiking leads to fat storage. That's not true. And then there's people that want to lower carbohydrates just simply because they think carbohydrates are bad. And they think that it makes them bloat, and maybe they do. And it makes them feel sluggish, makes them feel bad. And with that, it's very individual. Personally, I thrive off carbohydrates. I love them. I train better, I think better, I operate better, I sleep better. And then I've trained some people that don't function well on them. They do get sluggish. They get, in the afternoon, they feel like they need a coffee. They feel a bit bloated. They feel hungry, like they want to just keep eating after they have carbohydrates. So let me just break down how it became popular. And it could stem from, sugar being bad. Sugar is the devil. Sugar being like the worst thing. Like it was fat for a while back in the day. Everything low fat, dodge fat. Fat is bad. Fat makes you fat. If you eat fat, you get fat. That was quite popular. And then it was like sugar is the devil. But then they were like, oh man, but then now we can't sell cereal. So better change it. We better think of something else. What can we do? But sugar is carbohydrates, really, when we break it down. But let's talk about carbohydrates. So carbohydrates are just one of the fuel sources that we use in our body. We have proteins, we have fats, and then we also have carbohydrates. And it's a fuel source that has its own role. Like we could look at our overall calories into different fuels. Maybe, protein is diesel, carbohydrates are premium unleaded, and fat is, oil. And they all kind of like have their own purpose with what they do in our bodies. And carbohydrates are actually key for us. They help us perform better. It's our preferred energy system for our brain. And often when people go low carbohydrate, it's not the fact that they've gone low carbohydrate. It's the fact that they've lowered their calorie intake through lowering their carbohydrate intake. So going low carbohydrate can drop body fat. But ultimately, if you go low carbohydrate and then you don't replace them with any other foods, that means your calorie intake is going to go down. And then what we talked about before, you're going to create a calorie deficit. And that is the only way that you're going to lose fat. So low carbohydrate doesn't really do that, because if your calories are the same and your protein is the same and you have high carbs, low fat, or high fat, low carb, researchers showed time and time again that you lose a pretty similar amount of fat as long as your calories are creating a calorie deficit and your protein is high or maintained. Like if you go low carbohydrate and create a calorie deficit, and then go high carbohydrate and don't create a calorie deficit, you're not going to lose weight. But it's not because you had higher carbohydrates, it's because you had a higher calorie intake. With fat loss, calories are king. So it doesn't matter what your calories are made up of. If they're too high, they're too high. So that is the first principle that you must get correct. If you have low carbs, low fat, high protein, low protein, it doesn't matter. If your calories are too high, you will not lose body fat. Like if you pour too much water into a cup, it's going to overflow. There's no way to get around that. It doesn't matter what you put in the cup. You can pour juice in, you can pour milk in, you can pour water in. If there's too much of the stuff, it's going to overflow. And it's the same thing with fat loss. If you're just eating protein, carbohydrates, fats at whatever ratios you want to, but it's too much in general, the cup's going to overflow, and that is your fat overflowing and then getting deposited in your body fat. You're going to gain weight. So that's a good analogy for you to keep in mind. But often, like I said before, when people lower their carbohydrates, they often lower their calorie intake, and they don't replace it with other foods. They just go, oh man, I've stopped eating bread and I'm losing weight. Like, this low carb thing really works. And to most people, they would go, yeah, man, that's crazy. Bread's the worst. But it wasn't bread. It was the calories. Because now, instead of having a bacon and egg sandwich for breakfast, you just have bacon and eggs and avocado. Let's say it's a bit of a keto breakfast. Don't get me started on keto. We'll get there soon. And you're like, man, I feel great. I've been losing weight. You know, I've stopped having my 2 pieces of sourdough with butter on it every morning. And I just have bacon and eggs and avocado. And instead of having a sandwich at lunch, I have a salad. It's the same thing, but I just don't have the bread. And I've over the last 2 weeks, I've lost weight. It's crazy, man. Bread's the devil. Bread's not the devil. Eating too many calories is the devil for fat loss. So if you're going low carbohydrate, you may reduce your calorie intake and create a calorie deficit and then lose fat. But it wasn't because the carbohydrates were lower, it was because your calories were lower. And another thing to tack on to carbohydrates is, with going low carbohydrate, you retain less water in general, because carbohydrates, when we consume them, they convert into our glycogen stores, which we use for physical activity, for training and stuff like that. So when we have less carbohydrates, or let's say a low carbohydrate diet, our glycogen stores are often depleted. And with depleted glycogen stores, we just carry less water. And if we carry less water, we're going to weigh less. And that's why when people start a diet and they go, I'm going to go low carbohydrate, and then they start on Monday and it's Thursday and they're like, man, I've lost 3 kilos. I haven't been able to lose 3 kilos in 3 years. And now it's taken me 3 days. I've lost 3 kilos. Low carbohydrate diet is # the best. I feel amazing. All this kind of stuff. But really, it's just water. It's probably not body fat. It may have been if you created a calorie deficit, but don't mistake the two, right? So one thing you can actually test this with, which I've done many times, if you weigh yourself after a big high-carb dinner, like pasta, garlic bread, it's like carbonara, and garlic bread is delicious, and then you have some like ice cream gelato before bed, and you're like, oh, and you go to sleep and you're just like food coma out. Just massive carbohydrates. If you weigh yourself in the morning, you're probably going to weigh heavier. You will weigh heavier than if you had a low carbohydrate dinner. Like, let's just say you had a burger, a bunless burger with lettuce instead of buns. You have lettuce. It's quite sad. Or something even better is like when you use those big mushrooms and you use them as the bun. That's low carbohydrate as well. So let's say you have one of those burgers and then you snack on some almonds for dessert. Like, that's pretty low carbohydrate meal. If you wake up and weigh yourself, you're going to weigh less because your glycogen stores are not going to be full of carbohydrates because you pretty much had none for dinner. You're going to weigh less. So that's a very simple way just to go, oh, is Brock talking shit? No, he's not. That was true. Okay, so maybe when I lose fat, maybe I'm not losing fat. Maybe it's just water. That's why you need to, I like to anyway, weigh yourself daily because you can see the trends. And like, if at the end of the week you weigh yourself and you've dropped weight, and you've weighed yourself every day and you've seen the ups and downs, but like at the end of the week it's lower, then that tells you that you're going in the right direction. And this is why weighing yourself something like once a week can be quite dangerous for people that really care about their weight, and that number has a big impact on their mental health. Because, let's say they stuck to their calorie deficit the whole week, Monday, and then on Sunday they go to weigh themselves and they haven't lost weight, but they're like, I've been in a calorie deficit all week. How is this possible? And they didn't weigh themselves throughout the week to see their fluctuations go up and down. And then on Sunday, they weigh themselves and they're like the same weight. They're like, this is BS. Brock's a liar. He doesn't know what he's talking about. But on Saturday night, even if you stuck to your calorie deficit, you had like a late dinner and you had a high carbohydrate dinner. Like you saved all your carbohydrates for that dinner. You went out, you had that pasta garlic bread meal that I just said, and then you like retain this water and your glycogen stores are full and you haven't lost weight. And you're like, man, this isn't working. So you give your diet up. But if you weighed yourself every day, you would see in between that you were actually losing weight. You just had a high carb dinner. And you're retaining water, but the next day or so, that might just like get flushed out, and then you're gonna and then you've dropped 1.5 kilos, 2 kilos. You were so close, but because you only weighed yourself once at the end of the week, you don't have an accurate picture of what's happening.